So up to this point, we've been talking a lot about really what makes a dream worth pursuing. I mean, we went through the 10 questions, the dream test from John Maxwell in part 1 of this 2-part series. And in this second half, I wanted to take out an entire episode to talk about this next subject because I believe it's that important. I didn't want to, just cram it in and risk not addressing it enough. And even with the time allotted now, probably still won't address it enough, but I at least want to give myself more time. So in this episode, I want to talk about the 5 dream killers. The 5 dream killers that really suffocate and destroy, and I think in many cases rob us of our God-given dreams. As always, I believe this will add a lot of value to your life, but I'm going to ask you to do something. In this episode, I really need you to lean in because this episode really goes into some deep stuff that maybe you haven't thought about and maybe you don't want to think about, but I'm going to challenge you to do so. So with no further ado, hope you enjoy. So dream killers, that's a pretty intense term, I must admit, but I think it's appropriate. And you'll think it's appropriate when you hear this definition I read online that I think it really drives home how important it is to be aware of these elements called dream killers. So listen to this. Actually, I found this, I think, on like Facebook from someone named Joshua, which kind of weirded me out, but whatever, I'll take it. It's good stuff. Here's what it says. It says to fulfill destiny, be conscious of dream killers and put them at an arm's length, meaning get them away from you. Dream killers are those people or things that distract, embarrass, or discourage you from taking the right steps towards your God-given dreams, your destiny. All these things or people do is come around you to pull you down, amplify your weaknesses, and do everything possible to hinder you from achieving the God-given vision for your life. Are you hearing me, men? Dream killers. I don't think there's anything more dangerous and more harmful to a man's life than dream killers. Because dream killers prevent you and distract you from really walking in who you were created to be. I grew up in, as you probably know by now, I grew up in an underdeveloped, I think that's what they call it. That's the proper term for it. An underdeveloped community, which is another word for poor. But I seen this, man. If you're someone that you've seen, you come from a place that was underdeveloped as well, and you go back home and you see people doing the same thing in the same areas, some of them wearing the same clothes. These are some examples of what, or the carnage, the what's the word I'm looking for? These are examples of the damage, the collateral damage that dream killers can leave behind. And I want you to take it that serious as we go through these 5. There are 5 of them, and I think that's all we'll have time to really get into. There's probably more than that, but these are the 5 that I think are most prevalent and most important. So starting with number 1. And again, these are in no particular order, but I just wanted to share these with you. Number 1, the first dream killer that I think is most important and that you need to be aware of is a dream killer called negativity. Negativity is something that will rob you of your dreams. I saw these 4 actually, or 4 out of the 5 that I'm going to share with you were listed in this Crosswalk article. And I love some of the excerpts from there. So I'm going to share some of these with you. Now think about this. The Crosswalk talks about negativity, and it says from others or even from yourself, when we listen to this malicious chatter, that's that voice in our heads that tries to tell us that we're not anything, we weren't meant for anything. That's just, it just gives negative thoughts about ourselves and about other people. But when we listen to this malicious chatter, it prevents us from moving forward. It not only prevents us from moving forward, but it becomes a suffocating and discouraging image or voice that takes our focus off of God and magnifies every weakness we have. It takes our image off of all that God created us to be, and instead it turns our attention to every weakness we have. Now, here's why this is important. You can't pursue your dreams when your mind and your mentality is filled with negativity, negative words, whether it be from negative people, toxic people, or whatever. You name it. If it's negative, it will weigh you down like an anchor to a ship when we talk about going towards your life purpose. So negativity, it can't stay around. And that could be from yourself. You could be the main culprit of the negativity that's keeping you away from accomplishing your dreams. And that could be a voice in your head that you keep replaying about how, it can't be done, or why it shouldn't be done, or the 101 reasons why you're not the person to do it. All that just, it's like a hammer just chiseling away at your God-given purpose. So we got to get rid of the negativity. That's the number one dream killer. Number two, I think this one's probably even more important. It's called self-doubt. Self-doubt is also a major dream killer. And here's the thing. This might be possibly the biggest threat to your dreams. Because if we can be convinced that we're not good enough, there's really nothing else that can counter that. If in your mind and your mentality, and this is the difference I talk about in one of the talks I did a while ago, I made a comment and I said, failure is an option, but success is your destiny. And people, their heads turn like, what do you mean failure is an option? No, failure is that's inevitable. And yes, you're talking about the event of that is failure. That is inevitable. You're going to have, events in your life that are failures. You tried this, it didn't work. You did that, you failed. But what I meant in that statement is failure is an option, meaning you have the option of whether you see yourself as a failure or whether you see yourself the way that God sees you and intended for you to be seen. That's an option. Like, you can take that as an option, but I want to remind you what your destiny is. And your destiny is rooted and planted in the foundation that says, young man, you are good enough. You are enough. And here's something, I get on my little soapbox here for a second, because just in very little small increments, we've gotten to this place in society where men, it's like this attack on the value of men. It's like I don't know if it's intentional or not. I'm not saying it is, but as a man, I see it. And I can see all these little seeds that can leave self-doubt in a man's mind, because everything you see is telling you that you need to be more passive. You need to not go after the things that you were created to, or trying to tell you what you were created to do and to be, or how you should be. And this has been for forever. I mean, many talk about this in the framework of false masculinity. There are lies that men have bought and sold for years. And so oftentimes when there's a dream that may not fit that narrative of what society tells you a man should look like, or what maybe your community that you grew up in says you should look like, we begin to doubt that dream is really for us. And so self-doubt, that's a big one. There's an old proverb that says, as a man thinks, that is what he will be. So I want to challenge you. If you're someone that's been peddling around these negative and self-doubt rooted thoughts about yourself and your future, I'm challenging you, man. Get rid of those thoughts. You are good enough. Will it take some work? If it's something that if you went through the last episode and you made it through all 10 of those questions and they were all true for you, then go after it. Do it. I'm telling you, the earth needs it. We need it. We need whatever is inside of you, whatever gem that you're holding and keeping, wrapped up because you doubt yourself or you're insecure about, who you are because you don't look like the next man or the next man's talent. No, 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 no. I'm here to rip you out of that. Go after it. You are enough. And I won't let self-doubt rob you of your dreams. All right. Moving on to the next one. Number 3, fear. And I mean, you probably can guess this one was coming, but I'm not just talking about the fear of, that you have when the pool's cold and you want to jump in, but you feel like, oh my gosh, that's freezing. No, no, no. I'm talking about that paralyzing, gripping, stop you dead in your tracks kind of fear. Fear of people, fear of rejection, fear of failure, and fear of the unknown. That fear is what I'm talking about. And here's the thing. No matter what form of fear that you deal with, the end result is the same. All of the fear leads to one thing, and it's you getting stuck. And you won't move forward. You won't move forward into all that is waiting for you because you were afraid of what was on the other side of that fear. And so what happens is in that, waiting space, that space between fear and engaging what we were created to be, there's this, if you ever watch some of those, old school movies where, I don't know, Indiana Jones or I don't even like Indiana Jones, but that's what comes to mind right now. You ever seen the scene where the person's standing in the middle of two walls and then all of a sudden they start to cave in? That's the image of what fear does to your dream. The longer you wait in that little waiting space of fear, the more the walls close in. And before you know it, that dream, it gets suffocated. And it no longer lives. All because we allowed fear to essentially choke the life out of that dream. And this goes all the way back to the first episode when we talked about, that gold inside of you that will be looking down at you at the end of your life saying, hey, why didn't you engage? Why didn't you release us to the earth? That's how serious this is. This dream killer called fear. So here's what you need to do. You need to trust. And I keep going back to this because like I told you all in the first episode, faith for me is the foundation because I believe that's where hope begins. Therefore, that's where life begins. And one of the things that faith gives us is the hope that we were created and we don't have to be afraid of what's on the other side of the unknown or afraid of what people have to say about things that are in relation to our being, who we were created to be. Nobody can tell me about the work that I do. I don't care if they don't like it. I don't care if, they feel like it's not good enough. The reason why I do it is because I know it's attached to who I'm created to be. And that's a special place to make it to, man. Because when you make it to that place, you begin to live in the fulfillment of life instead of the reactionary phase of life where you're just looking for affirmation. Did you know, actually, by the way, words of affirmation is one of the highest percentage of love language for men. Why? Because here's the truth about men. We have fragile egos. We don't show it, but we have it. And a lot of times we won't do things because we're afraid of what people will say. And today I want to release you from that, man. Forget about what people have to say. If what you want to do isn't the most, culturally approved thing, do it anyways. And I think that leads to, we're not there yet, but before we get to my main point, the next one on the list of dream killers is procrastination. And boy, is this one we've all suffered from. But procrastination, I love how Crosswalk describes procrastination. They describe it as the lie. And what do they mean by the lie? The lie is that we don't have enough time, that we're soon about to run out of time, or that, it's too late, or why add to the madness of our already crazy schedule? Just all these lies that only just prolong and cause us to procrastinate. And before we know it, that's that midlife crisis where the man has gotten to a certain age and have realized that, I'm at 50 now, and I've lived 5 decades, and I might only have 2 or 3 left if I'm lucky. And I have so much that I haven't accomplished. So many things inside of my heart, dreams inside of my heart, that I know were for me that I never went after. That's the danger of the dream killer called procrastination. And to be honest, it's one that we have to continuously work on. All of these are ones we have to continuously work on, but I think procrastination is probably the one that seems the least harmful, but is actually probably up there in the top tier as the most, because it's a silent killer. That the ones that sneak up on you, and before you know it, days have turned into weeks have turned into months, and months have turned into years that we haven't pursued certain things in our life. To recap, we talked about 4 so far. The first was negativity. Let's get the negativity out. Let's do some, winter cleaning, since we're not in spring yet. Start getting that negativity out. The second was self-doubt. Don't doubt yourself, man. You are more than enough. More than enough. The third was fear. That crippling, paralyzing fear that all of us battle with. And then the fourth was procrastination, which is the silent killer. The one that robs us over an extended period of time. Before we know it, we are dreamless. And so that leads us to the 5th and final dream killer. And I think this one is the one that's talked about the least, but the one that many are dealing with and people don't even know the most. And that's trauma. This dream killer is called trauma. Now, I'll be the first to admit this one's hard to talk about. And I don't mean from an academic, coaching perspective. I mean, as someone who's dealt with trauma. This is hard to talk about. I've even found that, being married, this is one of those subjects that it's so uncomfortable talking to my wife about this subject. And I'm one that I don't believe I have never believed that I really carry a lot of these false masculinities frames in my mind. But I've realized that they are there. Many of them are there. And I talk about this, and it's uncomfortable. It's vulnerable. And I found that the easiest way for me to get this out is to use it as a tool to help someone else. So I'm going to share with you. Growing up as a young man, I experienced quite a traumatic event. And usually when I say this, I'm joking, but for this episode, I need you to know I'm not kidding. I experienced something that was so traumatic that it almost robbed me of everything I value and have today. It took away from me the thought of ever having my own family, of ever being able to maintain a stable relationship, of being a father, all that stuff. And what trauma does is it causes us to walk wounded. And the reason why we walk wounded is because we carry what's called hidden trauma. Now, let me back up for a second. Many of you hear the word trauma and you think of what we've all known that definition to be when we think about trauma. I mean, if you look at the American Psychological Association, it really defines trauma as an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, a natural disaster, war. But trauma is also identified and can be identified as what a person may experience as a response to an event they find physically or emotionally threatening or harmful. Trauma is something that we can experience as a response to any event that we find physically or emotionally threatening or harmful. There are many of you men listening to this podcast who you've experienced trauma and you never dealt with it. You've experienced things in your life, whether it's seeing a man put his hands on a woman as you were when you were younger, and seeing abuse. Maybe you encountered and endured verbal abuse of your own or physical abuse of your own. Or maybe it was just someone's, I don't know, maybe it was your environment and it was secondhand trauma from someone else. And there are some who can go through trauma and it will only register as an event in their life and it won't affect them long term. But then there are others who may feel overwhelmed, helpless, shocked, and not really know how to deal with it, because everything we see and know around us as men tells us that trauma is best dealt with getting up, brushing it off, and keeping it moving. But can I help you? That is the most unhealthiest thing you can do. And it's the number one. If I had to pick one out of these 5, this is the number one thing that will rob you of your dreams. Because anyone who suffers in silence eventually succumbs to that pain in silence. And again, I know this is hard to talk about. Trust me, I know. Listen, recently I sat my wife down and I told her, this was right before we had our son, and I was just going over, I do a lot of just self-evaluation, self-reflecting. And I just started thinking about how when we first got married, we took this whole marriage, what do you call those things? Marriage counseling things before you get married. And so I did this assessment. And one of the things that the counselor sat me down and talked to me about, I remember he said to me, he said, Josh, I looked at your scores and it's very unusual because everything is like even kill. Like all of your levels, all of your scores are like even. And it shows when we look further into some of the analysis, we also find that it seems like you grew up very disconnected. And I thought, you know what? That's true. I can't even, it's almost like I can't even articulate some of the nights that I remember growing up and going home, locking myself in my room and just hurting. Now, men, we don't really hurt like what a lot of, women think about, but that hurting, we manifested in things like anger. We manifested in things like suppression, where we use other outlets like, I don't know, drugs or alcohol or pornography or you name it, whatever would suppress the pain, distractions. But all that really is hidden trauma that will stick to us and will be the biggest deterrent from living out the purpose our life was intended for. And so this is what I want to tell you. If you're a man listening to this, from man to man, I want you to understand that it is okay to deal with your trauma. It is not okay to walk wounded. It's incredible that many men don't even know that the suicide rate for males is now 4 times that of females, which tells me and should tell you that too many of our brothers are hurting in silence. And it's all because of this false masculine, hero man, terrible image of what a man really is. Men, we are built on all 3 levels. We are physically men, we are spiritually men, and we are emotionally men. And that means it is okay to feel. And going back to that story of my wife, I kind of got off track, but I told her, I said, you know what, hon? I need to look into this because I feel like I struggle to feel. There are certain events that take place in my life and I should be excited, but I'm not. I should be sad, but I'm really not. I've practiced for so long disconnecting from my emotions and my feelings that I've forgotten, and I don't really know how to feel. And I know I'm not alone in that. I know I'm not alone in that. I know a lot of you men have experienced that as well. And so I wanted to end this episode, before we get into anything further, talking about your purpose or what you're here for. Before we go any further, we're talking about your dreams. I think we got to address the trauma. And I want you to know that it is okay to express whatever trauma you may have experienced. Do it, of course, do it in a trusting environment, or maybe starting with admitting it to yourself. Trust me, I took the step. I spoke to my wife just so I could get her thoughts on speaking to someone professionally about it. And boy, can I tell you, just because you make that choice doesn't mean it's going to be easy. In fact, my first session was terrible. And maybe we can get into that maybe another time, because I'm running out of time for this episode. But even though that first session was terrible, I decided to continue looking for an outlet and a resource to deal with whatever trauma may be underlying underneath the surface, because it's not worth my dreams. It's not worth my purpose. And here's the thing, men, it's not worth yours either. So deal with the trauma. Deal with the trauma, and let's stop walking around with hidden trauma and wounded. You've been listening to the Joshua Mentality. I hope this was helpful, men. I know we went kind of long. It's 2 episodes. We've kind of gone beyond the time that I like to aim for. But that's how important I think these subjects were. And I hope you're getting some out of this. And please let me know. Don't leave me out here hanging, having vulnerability hangovers, wondering if I shared too much. But let me know, is this helping, men? Is this really adding to your lives? I really hope it is. And make sure, as always, make sure you all subscribe, comment, hit your notifications so we can walk this thing out together and grow together. All right. Till next time, as I always tell you and will continue to tell you, success is your destiny. Till next time, my friends.